I'm interested to get your take on Russian oil sanctions. It seems that Russian exports to China have grown substantially. Surely we will just end up paying for the oil that China can now supply into the market, now that they have more access to Russian oil. So, I just want to hear your thoughts on this.
All right, so we need to unpack this question because it's really powerful. It's really, really fascinating. Because if you think about it, one of the key things that's driving the market crazy and inflation crazy is the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine on the February 24th, and now Europe is trying to pull off of Russian oil, natural gas, coal, right? As they do that, we're seeing increase in price. I mean, before the invasion, oil was at around 80 some dollars. It jumped up to $130, right? And now the European Union has decided that they're going to try to wean themselves of Russian energy by the end of the year. Well, theoretically, that could be a really big run in the price of oil. It turns into higher gas, higher diesel, which could be a real problem for an economy. Because if tons of money is going out for gas and diesel and what have you, because it's everywhere. Every product that you get, requires those energy sources to get to the shelves, type of thing, or get to your house. And so this is a big, big deal. But what he's asking is, what happens, if China is just picking up more and more of the oil, and then China pushes that oil out onto the market? Basically, what he's saying here in this question is Russian oil still flowing?
Hmm.
The concern is Russian oil is going to stop flowing because of sanctions, but if there's ways around the sanctions. So we did find a really cool slide here, which I'll share with you. So this is like who's still buying fossil fuels from Russia. So the red portion of each one is, crude oil, and then the lighter red is oil products, and then the lighter green is pipeline gas, and the darker green is the liquid natural gas, and then coal is the black. At the very top there is China, big red thing there, buying a lot of crude oil from Russia still. So what happens if they're buying from Russia and pushing that out? I don't know that that's happening yet. I know that they have a huge need for oil themselves, and they might be using it. But that still means that China is no longer going on the rest of the world's platform to try to find oil because they're getting so much from Russia. And it still means that Russian oil is flowing.
Yeah.
And then that frees up, theoretically, some of these other resources that China used to. I mean, even if they're not pushing this oil out onto the market, it still makes a difference because now China maybe isn't having to go out to these other sources to get oil. And that allows Europe to go to those other sources to get that oil. And so you can see where Europe's in trouble here. Germany has actually a huge green, light green for the pipeline gas. Massive exposure to Russian pipeline gas, and Italy and the Netherlands and Turkey and Poland and France, right? I mean, these are all countries that are going to have a really hard time cutting back on the oil, and so that's why the market is so jittery around this. But what if Russian oil and gas and what have still flows in essence, right?
Yeah, and there's ways like since Russia has had so many sanctions on it, there's always been ways. Once they invaded Afghanistan, there were sanctions on them, and the way they kind of skirt it is essentially producers, they sell to countries that are friendly to them, and then those countries would then sell out to the rest of the world. So there's been talks about the Latvian or the Lithuanian blend, which is basically 50.001% of Latvian, and then the rest is Russian oil. And the way they skirt it is they can say the majority of this barrel of oil comes from Latvia
Right.
or Lithuania, and so it's not considered Russian oil anymore.
Right.
And so
Right.
they also do that with coal through Mongolia and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of things where they kind of can skirt these sanctions.
Yeah, and that'll be fascinating. I mean, in one sense, the object is to try to put Russia in a box and choke off their economic ability to fund this conflict, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. And so, and that's important. But in terms of looking at the stock market, the amount of oil coming in versus the amount of oil being demanded, right? Supply and demand, and the ultimate price of oil is a huge deal to the stock market. When the price of oil really, really gets going and starts eating up more and more dollars, that can create havoc for the stock market on the to the downside. But if Russian oil is still flowing through these different methods and kind of sanction, skirting efforts, it's really fascinating. It's a great question, actually. It's really, really, get you thinking about what might be happening. Now, oil has come down from its high. And so maybe this is partly why, and just in the sense that, it hit $130 a barrel, for example, and now it's 107-ish or something along those lines. Not down tremendously, but actually been down a fair amount this month. And so, how much impact does that have? Is that big boogeyman that we're looking at here for, high oil prices and high gas prices really there? One thing that is interesting, though, is the pipeline gas. That's a little harder for me to imagine how that goes, because it's one thing to, have China ship some oil to you, or they're buying it instead of buying it someplace else, and you go to that someplace else. But pipeline gas is a direct connection. And we're trying to do this in the next 6 months, get off of that, right, for Germany, for example. And you can't build new pipeline in 6 months, to China or anywhere else for that matter. And so how do you replace that? That's going to be maybe more difficult for Germany to deal with. And I read this great article talking about how many of their industries use this gas as either an energy source or actually a feed source for chemical products and those types of things. And if they shut down some of these kind of furnaces and what have you, they actually kind of break when they shut them down. And it takes a really long time to get them going. And the only way to keep them going is to keep feeding them natural gas. And they're actually talking to the people in the country about, hey, we're going to have to sacrifice for the business. They're going to have to start possibly rationing. Certain companies will get more than others. And Germany is a big manufacturing center, huge actually. And so will companies start to, make decisions to go somewhere else? If they're in the scenario where they're trying to get off of Russian pipeline gas and it's creating all these problems, and you want to bring in a plant, maybe you go to a different country. And we've seen even that with China, where, companies are starting to look at outside of China for their manufacturing because they're worried about the COVID lockdown policies, for example. So, very interesting, and there are lots of ramifications that are going to go on here. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out, long term. It's a big deal. It's probably one of the biggest pieces of the Ukraine, invasion. So we'll see how it plays. It's fascinating.